A woman sits abandoned on a railway platform in the scorching Texas heat, her future stolen, her ticket home 4 days away. A widowed rancher with a dying land and a buried heart watches her refuse to beg. One decision will bind two broken lives together against a ruthless enemy who believes water, land, and people can all be bought. This is a story of survival, betrayal, and the kind of love that's built with dirt under your fingernails and sweat on your back. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The heat didn't apologize in Texas. It pressed down like a hand on your chest, thick and relentless, turning the air into something you had to chew before you could breathe it. July of 1887 had been the cruelest month anyone could remember, the kind of summer that baked the moisture out of wood, out of soil, out of hope itself. Caleb Hart knew that kind of heat. He'd been living inside it for 3 years, and it had nothing to do with the sun. He rode into the railway station at Coldwater Junction just past noon, his horse moving slow beneath him, both of them conserving energy they didn't have to spare. The town wasn't much. A water tower, a general store, a station platform that had seen better decades. Caleb didn't come here often. Too many memories. Too many people who still looked at him with pity in their eyes, like grief was something contagious they might catch if they stood too close. He'd come for feed. That was it. 50 pounds of grain and maybe some salt blocks if Henderson had any left. The herd was down to 23 head, and even those were starting to look like walking skeletons. The drought had been strangling the land for 18 months now, turning his grazing fields into fields of dust and regret. Caleb tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped onto the platform, his boots echoing hollow against the worn planks. The station master, a thin man named Porter, with spectacles that magnified his watery eyes, glanced up from his ledger and nodded once. "Caleb." "Porter." "You here for the feed delivery?" "If it came in." Porter nodded toward the freight office. "Got your 50 pounds. Sign for it, and it's yours." Caleb moved toward the office, already thinking about the ride back, about how long those 50 pounds would last, about whether he should start selling off the cattle now before they dropped dead and became worthless. He was halfway across the platform when Porter spoke again, quieter this time. "Caleb." He stopped, turned. Porter gestured with his chin toward the far end of the platform, where the shade from the station roof cut a sharp line across the boards. "Thought you should know. She's been sitting there since the morning train." That's when Caleb saw her. A woman, maybe 25, maybe older, hard to tell with the way she held herself, like she'd learned a long time ago not to show weakness. She wore a dark gray traveling dress that had probably been nice once, but was now rumpled and dusty from the journey. Her hair, brown and pinned up tight, had a few strands that had come loose in the heat. She sat on a battered leather trunk, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight as a rifle barrel. She wasn't looking at anyone. She stared straight ahead at nothing, her face carefully blank. "Who is she?" Caleb asked. Porter lowered his voice even more, like he was ashamed to say it out loud. "Mail order bride came in on the 9:15 from Fort Worth." Caleb felt something cold move through his chest. "Where's the man who sent for her?" "That's the thing." Porter shook his head. "Vernon Stake, you know him, runs that pig farm east of here. He was here when she got off the train. Took one look at her and said she wasn't what he ordered. Said the photograph must have been someone else. Just walked away, left her sitting there." Caleb looked back at the woman. She hadn't moved, hadn't turned her head. She sat like a statue, like if she stayed still enough, she might disappear. "How long ago?" 3 hours, near about." "What's she supposed to do?" Porter shrugged helplessly. "Next eastbound train's Thursday, 4 days from now. I told her she could wait in the station office, but she said she'd prefer the platform." He hesitated. "I don't think she has any money, Caleb. She came here with everything she owned in that trunk, and now she's got no place to go and no way to get there." Caleb stood there, the heat pressing down on him, his horse shifting restlessly at the post behind him. He should walk away. He should sign for his feed, load it up, and ride back to his dying ranch and his empty house, and the 2 graves on the hill that he visited every Sunday like clockwork. He had enough problems. He didn't need to collect someone else's. But something about the way she sat there, refusing to cry, refusing to beg, refusing to collapse, even though the world had just pulled the ground out from under her, made him think of another woman. A woman who'd been stubborn as a mule and twice as proud. A woman who'd died in his arms while he whispered useless promises about how everything would be fine. Caleb walked toward the woman before he'd fully decided to do it. His boots sounded too loud on the platform. She heard him coming but didn't turn. Didn't acknowledge him at all. He stopped a few feet away, suddenly aware that he didn't know what the hell he was going to say. Up close, he could see more details. Her dress had been mended in places. Her hands, folded so carefully in her lap, had calluses on the fingers, working hands. There was a small bruise on her left wrist, fading to yellow. And her eyes, when she finally turned them on him, were the color of slate before a storm. "I'm not interested in charity," she said. Her voice was low, controlled, with an accent that spoke of somewhere farther east. Pennsylvania, maybe. Somewhere civilized. Caleb pulled off his hat, held it against his chest. "Wasn't offering any." "Then you can move along." "I own a ranch about 8 miles west of here. Small operation. Cattle, some chickens." He cleared his throat. "My housekeeper left last year to tend to her sister in Dallas. Place has been falling apart since. I could use someone who knows how to cook, clean, keep things running." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm not that kind of worker. I'm not that kind of man." Caleb met her gaze straight on. "Separate quarters, honest wage, meals included. You'd earn your keep, nothing more." She studied him for a long moment, and Caleb had the uncomfortable feeling she was looking past his words, past his face, straight into whatever broken thing he carried around inside his chest. "What's the wage?" she asked. $10 a month, plus room and board." "That's low." "It's what I can afford. Ranch isn't exactly prosperous right now." "Why should I believe you're any different from the man who left me here?" It was a fair question. Caleb looked down at his hat, at the worn brim he'd been turning in his hands. "My wife died 3 years ago. Fever took her and my son both, within 2 days of each other. I buried them on a hill overlooking the house. Every Sunday I go up there and tell them about the week, even though I know they can't hear me." He looked back up at her. "I'm not looking for a replacement. I'm looking for help. There's a difference." Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but a small crack in the armor. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb Hart." "I'm Mara Ellison." She stood up, and Caleb realized she was taller than he'd expected, almost eye level with him. "I'll work for you, Mr. Hart, but I need your word, written if possible, that my employment is honest work for honest pay. Nothing else. You have it. And if I want to leave, I can leave. No questions, no obligations." "Agreed." She nodded once, sharp and businesslike. "Then yes, I'll take the job." Caleb didn't let himself feel relief. He just gestured toward her trunk. "You travel light?" "Everything I own is in there." He picked up the trunk, heavier than it looked, and carried it toward his horse. Mara followed, her footsteps quiet behind him. Porter watched from the station office, his expression somewhere between concern and curiosity. Caleb secured the trunk and helped Mara up onto the horse behind him. She sat carefully, maintaining as much distance as possible, one hand gripping the edge of his saddle. "Hold on," he said. "I'm fine." "It's 8 miles of rough trail. Hold on." After a moment's hesitation, she placed her free hand lightly on his shoulder. Caleb clicked his tongue and urged the horse forward, away from the station, away from the town, out into the open country where the heat shimmered like water on the horizon. They rode in silence for the first mile. The land stretched out around them, brown and brittle, punctuated by struggling mesquite and the occasional skeleton of a tree that had given up the fight. Everything looked tired. Everything looked like it was one bad day away from just lying down and dying. "How long has it been dry?" Mara asked. 18 months? Got a little rain last spring, but not enough. Wells are dropping, creeks are dust, cattle are starving." "Why do you stay?" Caleb considered the question. "This land belonged to my father. He built the house with his own hands, cleared the fields, dug the well, raised me and my brother here. When he passed, the land came to me. Seemed wrong to let it go just because times got hard." "Where's your brother now?" "Montana. He left 10 years ago, said Texas was too hot and too stubborn. Guess he was right." They rode on. The sun beat down mercilessly. Caleb's shirt stuck to his back with sweat. He could feel Mara behind him, rigid and careful, like she was afraid to relax even for a moment. "You don't have to tell me," he said after another mile. "But I'm curious what brought you all the way to Texas to marry a stranger." Mara was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I worked as a seamstress in Philadelphia. My employer was a man named Richard Ashford, owned 3 textile factories, had more money than sense. He decided I was his property along with the sewing machines." Her voice stayed flat, factual. "When I refused, he made it clear I wouldn't work anywhere in that city again. The mail-order advertisement was the only door I could find that led somewhere he couldn't follow." Caleb felt anger move through him, hot and sharp. "Vernon Stake's a fool and a coward, but at least he let you walk away. Ashford sounds like something worse." "He is." "You think he'll come looking?" "I think I'm not worth the train fare to him, but I'm betting on his arrogance to keep me safe." They crested a low rise and the ranch came into view. It wasn't much. A single-story house built from rough-cut lumber and determination, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, a chicken coop, a well with a windmill that squeaked every third rotation. The fencing needed repair. The paint had long since surrendered to the weather, but it stood. Mara didn't say anything as they approached. Caleb tried to see it through her eyes, this ramshackle collection of buildings in the middle of nowhere, miles from anything resembling civilization. It must have looked like the end of the earth. He helped her down from the horse, then carried her trunk up onto the porch. The front door stuck a little. It always did when the humidity dropped, and he had to shoulder it open. Inside, the house was exactly what he'd been avoiding looking at for months. Dust covered every surface thick as fur. The kitchen table had coffee rings and old plates stacked in corners. The stove looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in a year because it hadn't. The floor needed sweeping. The windows needed washing. The whole place had the smell of abandonment, that particular staleness that comes when a space stops being lived in and starts being merely occupied. Mara stood in the doorway, taking it all in. Caleb waited for judgment, for disgust, for her to tell him she'd changed her mind and demand to be taken back to the station. Instead, she set her shoulders and walked inside. "Where are my quarters?" she asked. Caleb showed her to the small room at the back of the house. It had been meant as a nursery once. Now it held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the southern fields. The room was dusty but intact. "I'll bring your trunk," he said. "Thank you." He left her there and went to tend to the horse, giving her space to settle in. When he came back inside 20 minutes later, he found her in the kitchen. She'd already tied a cloth over her hair and rolled up her sleeves. The stove had been pulled away from the wall, and she was scrubbing behind it with methodical determination. "You don't have to start today," Caleb said. Mara didn't look up. "I'm working for wages, Mr. Hart. That means I work." "Caleb, just Caleb." "Caleb, then." She straightened up, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "Do you have vinegar and soap and a mop that isn't held together with prayers?" He found her what supplies he had, which wasn't much, and then got out of her way. He had work of his own to do. The windmill needed adjusting, and the water trough had a leak that needed patching. He spent the afternoon out in the sun, his hands busy with familiar tasks, trying not to think about the fact that there was another person in his house for the first time in a year. By the time the sun started to drop toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep purple, Caleb was exhausted. He washed up at the pump outside and came back in through the kitchen door. He stopped in the doorway. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The kitchen gleamed. The stove had been scrubbed until the black iron shone. The table had been cleared and wiped down. The floor had been swept and mopped. The windows had been washed, letting in the evening light in a way that made the whole room feel larger, cleaner, almost alive. And on the table, set out with careful simplicity, was dinner. Cornbread, beans, a bit of bacon fried crisp, coffee steaming in his old tin pot. Nothing fancy, but it was real food, a real meal. And the smell of it filled the house like a memory Caleb had been trying to forget. Mara stood by the stove, still wearing the cloth over her hair, her sleeves still rolled up. She looked at him with those slate-gray eyes and gestured to the table. "Sit," she said, "before it gets cold." Caleb sat. She poured coffee for both of them and sat across from him, her posture still careful, still guarded. Caleb picked up a piece of cornbread and broke it open. The steam rose, carrying that particular smell of cornmeal and butter, and something twisted hard in his chest. The shape was wrong. No, not wrong. Different. Sarah had made her cornbread in rounds, pressed thin with her thumb in the center. These were squares, rough-edged, made in a pan the way his mother used to make them. Not the same, but close enough that for just a second he forgot where he was, forgot that Sarah was gone, forgot everything except the smell of bread and the sound of someone moving in the kitchen. Then reality came crashing back, and Caleb had to look down at his plate because if he didn't, he was going to break. "Is something wrong?" Mara asked quietly. "No." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "It's good. Thank you." They ate in silence. When Caleb finished, he stood up quickly, scraping his chair back too hard. "I'll be in the barn," he said, "if you need anything." He didn't wait for her response. He just walked out into the cooling evening air, out to the barn where he could be alone with his grief and his guilt and all the ways he kept failing to move forward. Behind him, in the warm kitchen that finally looked like a kitchen again, Mara Ellison sat very still at the table and stared at the empty chair across from her. She'd seen the way his face had changed when he broke open that cornbread. She'd seen the pain flash through his eyes before he locked it away. She understood. She understood better than he knew. After all, she'd been running from her own ghosts when she climbed onto that train in Philadelphia. And now here she was, in a house full of someone else's ghosts, trying to pretend that work and wages could fill the empty spaces inside a person. Outside, the night settled over the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The windmill creaked its eternal complaint, and in two separate parts of the same broken house, two people who'd lost everything sat alone in the dark and wondered if survival was the same thing as living. The next morning arrived before the sun, announced by the sound of someone moving in the kitchen. Caleb woke in his bed, the same bed he'd shared with Sarah, though he only slept on one side now, the left side, his side, leaving the right side smooth and untouched, and lay there for a moment, disoriented. Then he remembered. Mara. He dressed quickly and walked into the kitchen to find her already at the stove, coffee brewing, biscuits in the oven, bacon sizzling in the iron skillet. She'd changed into a simpler work dress, brown calico with the sleeves rolled up. Her hair was pinned back tight. She moved with quiet efficiency, like she'd been working in this kitchen her whole life. "Morning," Caleb said. "Good morning." She gestured to the table. "Coffee's ready. Biscuits in 5 minutes." "You didn't have to get up so early." "Ranches run on early mornings. So do I." Caleb poured himself coffee and sat down, watching her work. There was something almost aggressive in the way she cooked, like she was fighting a battle against the stove itself. Like if she stayed busy enough, stayed useful enough, she could prove her right to exist in this space. He recognized it because he did the same thing, stayed busy, stayed moving, never stopped long enough for the grief to catch up. When the biscuits were done, she set them on the table along with the bacon and a jar of preserves that must have come from the back of the pantry. They ate together, the silence stretching between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with all the things they weren't saying. Finally, Caleb set down his fork. "I need to tell you about my plan," he said. "The reason I can pay you at all, and the reason I might not be able to pay you if it doesn't work." Mara looked at him over her coffee cup, waiting. "The drought's killing me," he said bluntly. "I'm down to 23 head of cattle, and that number drops every week. The well's holding for now, but the grazing's gone. I can't feed them, and I can't sell them because nobody's buying starving animals." He paused. "There's a low basin about a mile northwest of here, natural depression in the land. If I could build a dam across the narrow end, I could catch rainwater when it finally comes. Store it, use it to keep the herd alive through the next dry spell." "That's a big if," Mara said. "What if it doesn't rain?" "Then I lose everything anyway. At least this way I'm fighting instead of just waiting to die." She considered this, her gray eyes steady on his face. "How much of a dam are we talking about?" "Earthwork dam, maybe 40 feet across, 6 feet high at the center. It's not fancy engineering, just dirt and rocks piled up smart, with a spillway to handle overflow. And you plan to build this yourself? Don't have money to hire help. Don't have time to wait. He met her eyes. I'll understand if you want no part of it. It's hard labor, and the odds aren't great. Mara set down her cup with a decisive clink. When do we start? Caleb blinked. We? You hired me to work. This is work. She stood up and started clearing the plates. I assume we'll need tools, shovels, picks, a wagon to haul dirt? I have tools, but Mara, tomorrow morning? She asked, cutting him off. After breakfast? Caleb stared at her. This woman who'd been abandoned on a train platform yesterday, who had every reason to protect herself and hold back, was volunteering to break her back on a desperate plan that might not even work. Tomorrow morning, he agreed quietly. After breakfast. Something that might have been a smile flickered across Mara's face, barely there, gone before Caleb could be sure he'd seen it. She turned back to the dishes, and Caleb sat there for a moment longer, his coffee growing cold in his cup, wondering what kind of person throws themselves into someone else's failing dream without hesitation. The kind who understands what it means to have nowhere else to go, he realized. The kind who knows that sometimes the only way to outrun your own ghosts is to fight someone else's battles until you remember how to fight your own. He stood up and brought his cup to the wash basin. Thank you, he said quietly. For breakfast. For all of it. Mara didn't turn around, but her shoulders relaxed just slightly. You're paying me to be here, Caleb. No thanks necessary. But they both knew it was more than that. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the cool morning air. The drought continued its patient work of destruction. The cattle lowed in their pen, hungry and thirsty. The land waited, cracked and desperate, for water that might never come. And in the small ranch house, two people who'd stopped believing in second chances began to build something that looked dangerously like hope. The basin sat like a scar in the earth, a shallow depression carved by ancient water that no longer ran. Caleb stood at its edge the next morning, surveying the work ahead with the kind of grim determination that comes from having no other options. The sun was already climbing, already turning the air thick and heavy. It was barely 7 o'clock. Mara came up beside him carrying 2 shovels over her shoulder and a canvas water bag slung across her chest. She'd changed into an even plainer dress, dark blue and practical, with a man's work shirt over it and a wide-brimmed hat that looked like it had seen better decades. You found that in the barn? Caleb asked, nodding at the hat. Back corner, under some old tack. She handed him one of the shovels. Figured sun poisoning wouldn't help either of us. Caleb took the shovel and looked out across the basin. The plan was simple in theory, brutal in execution. They needed to build up the narrow eastern edge where the land pinched together, creating a wall that would hold back water when the rains finally came. The dirt would have to be moved wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow from higher ground, then packed down hard enough to hold against pressure. The spillway would need to be carved out by hand to prevent overflow from washing out the whole structure. Weeks of backbreaking work. Maybe months. For something that might never even fill. We'll start with the foundation, Caleb said, pointing to the narrow gap. Dig down to harder ground, then build up from there. The wheelbarrow's in the barn. We can take turns hauling. Mara nodded and drove her shovel into the earth. The first day was hell. The ground fought them like it had something personal against the idea of being moved. The topsoil came up easy enough, but beneath that was calèche. Limestone and clay baked together by centuries of heat into something closer to concrete than dirt. Every shovelful required the full weight of their bodies, driving down, leveraging up, muscles screaming protest. Caleb worked in his usual silence, the rhythm of physical labor a familiar companion, but he found himself acutely aware of Mara beside him, matching him stroke for stroke. She didn't complain, didn't slow down, didn't ask for breaks. She just dug, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the ground in front of her like it was an enemy that needed defeating. By midday, when the sun reached its peak and the heat became dangerous, Caleb finally called a halt. We need to stop, he said. Drink water, rest in the shade. Mara straightened up, and Caleb saw her wince as her back protested. Her face was flushed red beneath the brim of her hat, and sweat had soaked through her shirt in dark patches. I'm fine, she said. You're not, and neither am I. He gestured toward a scraggly mesquite tree that offered a pitiful circle of shade. Come on. They sat with their backs against the trunk, passing the water bag between them. Caleb's hands were already blistered despite the calluses he'd built up over years of ranch work. He could only imagine what Mara's hands looked like. She'd been a seamstress, used to fine work with needles, not shovels that weighed 10 pounds, and wanted to take skin as payment. "Let me see," he said, holding out his hand. Mara hesitated, then showed him her palms. They were raw. Blisters had already formed and broken, leaving weeping patches of exposed skin. She'd wrapped them with strips of cloth from somewhere, but blood was seeping through in places. "Christ, Mara." "It's fine." "It's not fine." Caleb pulled a small tin from his pocket, salve he kept for rope burns and barbed wire cuts. "This'll help, and tonight we'll find you proper gloves." "I don't need—" "Yes, you do." He met her eyes. "This is a marathon, not a sprint. If you wreck your hands on day one, you won't be able to work tomorrow. And I need you able to work tomorrow." Something shifted in her expression. Acknowledgement, maybe, or just too much exhaustion to argue. She let him apply the salve, his rough fingers as gentle as he could make them against her damaged palms. When he finished, she pulled the cloth wrappings back into place without a word. They sat in silence for a while, drinking water, letting their bodies recover enough to finish the day. A lizard skittered across a nearby rock. Somewhere overhead, a hawk circled on the thermals. "Why did you really offer me work?" Mara asked suddenly. Caleb considered the question. He could give her the easy answer, that he needed help, that the ranch was falling apart. But something about the stillness of this moment, the shared exhaustion, made him reach for something closer to truth. "When I saw you on that platform," he said slowly, "you reminded me of my wife. Not in looks. Sarah was shorter, darker hair, always had dirt under her fingernails from the garden she kept. But the way you held yourself, like you'd decided the world could go to hell before you'd let it see you break." He paused. "Sarah was like that. Even when the fever had her so weak she couldn't stand, she kept trying to get up, trying to take care of our boy, trying to take care of me. She died still fighting." Mara was quiet for a moment. "How old was your son?" 4. His name was Daniel. He liked horses and hated beans and asked more questions than any human being ought to be capable of asking. Caleb heard his own voice crack and forced it steady. He went first. "Sarah held him while he died, and I think part of her just followed him, like she couldn't stand to be in a world where he wasn't. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring them back." "No," Mara agreed softly. "It doesn't." They sat with that truth between them, the hard, immovable fact that some losses don't heal, they just become part of the landscape you learn to navigate. "What about you?" Caleb asked. "Why did you really leave Philadelphia?" Mara's jaw tightened. "I told you, my employer—" "I know what you told me, but there's more to it than that." She stared out at the empty basin for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, carefully emotionless. "Richard Ashford owned the factory where I worked. He was 42, married, 3 children, rich enough that he thought everything was for sale, including people." She pulled at a loose thread on her sleeve. "He started with compliments, then gifts I didn't want, then his hand on my back when he walked past. When I told him to stop, he laughed, said I should be grateful for the attention." Caleb felt rage building in his chest, but kept his mouth shut. This wasn't his story to interrupt. "One night he cornered me in the cutting room after everyone else had gone home. Told me he'd decided I was going to be his mistress, that he'd set me up in an apartment, give me money, and all I had to do was be available when he wanted me." Mara's hands had curled into fists. "I told him no. He grabbed my wrist, that's where this bruise came from, and said I didn't have a choice, that if I refused, he'd make sure I never worked again." "What did you do?" A ghost of a smile touched Mara's lips, cold and sharp. "I stabbed him with my sewing scissors, right in the hand. He bled all over the floor and screamed like I'd killed him." The smile faded. "He kept his word about the work. Within a week, every factory, every tailor shop, every place that did piecework in Philadelphia knew my name, knew I was trouble. No one would hire me." "So you ran." "I survived." Mara turned to look at him, her gray eyes hard. The mail-order bride advertisement was in the back of a newspaper someone had left at the boarding house. I didn't even care who the man was or what he looked like. I just needed to be somewhere Ashford's name didn't reach, and Texas seemed about as far as I could get without falling off the edge of the earth. Caleb thought about Vernon Stake, that pig farmer with his small mind and smaller heart, taking one look at Mara and deciding she wasn't good enough, not knowing that he'd just thrown away a woman who'd fought for her own dignity with scissors and blood. He was a damn fool, Caleb said. Who? Stake and Ashford, both of them. He stood up, offering her his hand. Come on, we've got another 3 hours before the light goes bad. Mara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her palm was sticky with salve and blood, but her grip was firm. They went back to work. The days developed a rhythm. Wake before dawn, breakfast in the quiet kitchen. Work until the heat became lethal. Rest in whatever shade they could find. Work again until the sun dropped. Dinner, sleep, repeat. Caleb's dam grew inch by stubborn inch. The foundation trench deepened, then began to fill with packed earth hauled from higher ground. Mara learned to swing a pickaxe like she'd been born to it, learned to pack dirt with the flat of her shovel until it rang solid beneath the blade. Her hands toughened. Her shoulders grew stronger. The careful, guarded woman from the train platform began to show flashes of something fiercer. On the 5th day, she started singing while she worked. It wasn't loud, just a quiet melody that drifted across the basin while she hauled wheelbarrow loads of earth. Caleb didn't recognize the tune, but it had a mournful quality that suited the landscape. When he asked about it later, Mara just shrugged. My mother used to sing it, she said. I don't remember the words anymore, just the music. On the 7th day, they hit a layer of rock that wouldn't budge. Caleb spent 2 hours attacking it with a pickaxe while Mara cleared away the broken pieces. Sweat ran into his eyes. His back felt like it might split in half, but the rock eventually surrendered, and they moved forward. On the 10th day, Mara beat him to the kitchen. Caleb woke to find breakfast already cooking and Mara at the table, mending one of his shirts with quick, precise stitches. She'd noticed it torn and just fixed it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like taking care of him was part of the job she'd signed on for. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to do that he'd hired her to cook and clean, not to mother him. But the words stuck in his throat because the truth was, it felt good. It felt like someone gave a damn whether his shirt had holes in it or not. Thank you, he said instead. Mara tied off the thread and bit it clean. You're welcome. They were becoming something, Caleb realized. Not quite friends. There was too much careful distance still between them. But not strangers either. Something new, something unnamed. Two people learning to exist in the same space without all their sharp edges constantly catching. And then, on the 14th day, everything shifted. They were working in the trench, Caleb digging, Mara packing the loose earth tight, when she suddenly stopped. Her shovel dropped from her hands and clattered against the rocks. Caleb looked up. What's wrong? Mara's face had gone pale. She was staring past him, toward the road that led to the ranch. Caleb turned and saw a rider approaching, a man on a good horse moving at an easy pace. You expecting someone? Mara asked, and there was something in her voice that made Caleb's instincts sharpen. No. The rider drew closer, resolving into details. Middle-aged, well-dressed in a way that didn't suit ranch country. Dark suit despite the heat. Expensive hat. The kind of man who carried his wealth like a weapon. He reined in at the edge of the basin and looked down at them with the expression of someone examining livestock at auction. Caleb Hart? He called. That's me. Caleb climbed out of the trench, instinctively placing himself between Mara and the stranger. The man dismounted with practiced ease. Up close, Caleb could see more, pale eyes that missed nothing, a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so cold, hands that had never done a day's real work. My name is Silas Crow, the man said, extending his hand. Caleb shook it briefly. Crow's grip was firm but calculated, the kind of handshake that was meant to intimidate. What can I do for you, Mr. Crow? Crow smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I represent a consortium of investors interested in developing this region. We've been purchasing land throughout the valley, consolidating holdings, if you will. More efficient that way. He gestured at the basin, at the half-built dam. I see you're putting in waterworks, private irrigation, for my cattle. Ambitious. Crow walked closer to the trench, peering down at their work with apparent interest. Must be costing you quite a bit. Labor, materials, time away from other ranch duties. Managing. I'm sure you are. Crow turned back to face him. The thing is, Mr. Hart, my investors and I have plans for a much larger reservoir system. We've already acquired the Dockery Ranch to the north and the Morrison Place to the south. Your property sits right in the middle, including this basin, which would be ideal for our purposes. Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. This land's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. Crow pulled a piece of paper from his jacket. I'm prepared to offer you $12,000. That's well above market value for a struggling cattle operation in drought country. $12,000. It was more money than Caleb had seen in his entire life. Enough to start over somewhere else. Somewhere the land wasn't dying. Enough to put this whole failed dream behind him and walk away clean. He looked at the paper in Crow's hand and didn't reach for it. Not interested. Crow's smile thinned. Mr. Hart, be reasonable. Your ranch is failing. Everyone in the county knows it. You're down to what, 20 head? 15? The drought's not going to break just because you pile up some dirt and hope. Take the money. Start fresh somewhere else. This land belonged to my father, his father before that. My wife and son are buried here. Caleb's voice stayed level, but there was iron underneath. I'm not selling. Sentimental attachment is expensive, Mr. Hart. Can you afford it? Reckon I'll find out. For the first time, Crow's expression showed something other than calculated charm. Annoyance flickered across his face, quickly suppressed. His eyes shifted past Caleb to where Mara still stood in the trench, watching. And who's this? Crow asked. My housekeeper. Crow's gaze raked over Mara with an appreciation that made Caleb's hands curl into fists. Pretty thing. Where'd you find her? That's none of your concern. Everything in this valley is my concern, Mr. Hart. Crow smiled again, and this time there was something ugly in it. I make it my business to know what's happening on land I intend to own. So tell me, is she just your housekeeper, or is there more to the arrangement? Mara climbed out of the trench, her movements deliberate. She walked right up to Crow, close enough that he had to take a step back, and met his eyes without flinching. I work for wages, Mr. Crow. Honest labor for honest pay. If that concept is foreign to you, I suggest you ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of and stay there. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Crow stared at Mara like he couldn't quite believe she'd spoken to him that way. Then his face went dark red, and when he smiled this time, it looked like something made of teeth and malice. I see, he said softly. Well, that's very enlightening. He turned back to Caleb. You're making a mistake, Mr. Hart. I'm trying to be generous here, trying to make this easy for everyone involved. Don't recall asking for your generosity. No, you didn't. Crow walked back to his horse and mounted up in one smooth motion. But you'll wish you had. When your well runs dry and your cattle die and you're sitting in that house with nothing but memories and debt, you'll wish you'd been smart enough to take my offer. Possibly. But I'll still have the land. Crow looked down at him, and there was something final in his expression, like he'd made a decision and everything from this point forward was just inevitable consequence. The water in that basin, if it ever fills, legally belongs to whoever owns the mineral and water rights in this county. My consortium holds most of those rights already. We're in the process of acquiring the rest. He leaned forward in his saddle. Build your little dam if it makes you feel better. But the water you catch won't be yours to keep. Think about that, Mr. Hart. Think about what happens when all your work benefits someone else. He turned his horse and rode away, unhurried, like a man who already knew how this story ended. Caleb and Mara stood in silence, watching him disappear down the road. The sun beat down. The wind carried dust. Everything felt wrong suddenly, like the air pressure had changed before a storm. Is he right? Mara asked quietly. About the water rights? I don't know. Caleb picked up his shovel, gripping it too hard. My father built this ranch from open land. I've got the deed, but water law's complicated. If Crow's bought up rights from the county, he shook his head, I need to check the records in town. And if he does own the rights? Caleb looked at the dam. 14 days of brutal work, of blood and blisters and hope they could barely afford. Then we're building this for nothing. Mara was quiet for a long moment. Then she climbed back down into the trench and picked up her shovel. Or, she said, we're building it anyway, and we figure out the legal problems later. Because men like Silas Crow don't just take what they want, they make you give up first, make you believe you've already lost before the fight even starts. Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd been abandoned, who'd run halfway across the country from a man who thought he owned her, who'd spent 2 weeks breaking her back on a stranger's desperate dream. She stood in the trench with dirt on her face and fire in her eyes, and she wasn't backing down. Something shifted in Caleb's chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. He climbed back into the trench beside her. "Let's get back to work," he said. They dug until sundown, neither of them speaking, both of them pushing harder than they should have. When they finally stopped, Caleb's hands were bleeding through his gloves, and Mara looked ready to collapse. But the dam was visibly higher than it had been that morning. That night, after Mara had gone to bed, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with every piece of paper his father had left him spread out in front of him. Deeds, surveys, water permits from the 1860s when the rules were different. He read until his eyes burned, searching for something that would prove Crow wrong. What he found instead was silence, gaps in the documentation, places where his father's claim ended and county jurisdiction began. He found enough doubt to keep him awake until dawn. The next morning, Mara found him still at the table, surrounded by papers. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. "No." She poured coffee and sat down across from him. "What did you find?" "Nothing good, nothing bad, just nothing." He rubbed his face. "I need to go to town, check the county records, maybe talk to someone who understands water law better than I do. I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I'm coming." Her tone left no room for argument. "If Crow's going to be a problem, I want to know what we're dealing with." Caleb looked at her and realized she'd said we, not you, we. "All right," he said. "We'll leave after breakfast." They rode into Coldwater Junction 2 hours later, the town shimmering in the heat like a mirage. The county clerk's office was a small building next to the courthouse, run by a man named Albert Chen, who'd been recording land transactions since before Caleb was born. Chen looked up from his ledger when they walked in, his expression neutral behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Caleb Hart. Haven't seen you in a while." "Mr. Chen." Caleb took off his hat. "I need to look at water rights records for my property. Section 14, Township 3 North. Chen's expression shifted slightly, not quite sympathy, but close to it. "Someone's been asking about those recently." "Let me guess. Silas Crow?" "Or his lawyers, same thing, really." Chen stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. "Your father filed a water claim in 1868, which should give you rights to surface water on your property. But Crow's consortium has been buying up downstream rights and arguing that any reservoir system constitutes a change in natural flow, which requires county approval." "That's horseshit." "Maybe, but it's legal horseshit." Chen spread the documents on the counter. "Look here. Crow's people filed a petition 3 months ago claiming that private dams interfere with commercial development of the watershed. They're pushing for a ruling that would require permits for any water retention structure over a certain size." Mara leaned over the papers, studying them with the same intensity she brought to everything else. "Has the county ruled on the petition?" "Not yet, but Crow's got influence. Money talks in drought country. Folks are desperate enough to listen to anyone who promises prosperity." Caleb felt something heavy settle in his chest. "So even if I finish the dam, Crow could force me to tear it down? Or he could buy it from you at a price he sets." Chen looked at him over his spectacles. "I'm sorry, Caleb. Your father was a good man. This isn't right. But legal and right aren't always the same thing." They left the clerk's office and walked back toward where they'd tied the horse. The street was quiet. Most people had the sense to stay indoors during the worst of the heat. But Caleb spotted a familiar figure sitting outside the general store, whittling a piece of wood with methodical patience. Eli Mercer. 70-some years old, respected by everyone who'd lived in the valley longer than 10 minutes. He'd been a circuit judge once, before his health failed. Now he just sat and watched and occasionally offered opinions that people actually listened to. Mercer looked up as they approached. Caleb Hart, and this must be the young woman I've been hearing about. Mara Ellison, Mara said, offering her hand. Mercer shook it with a grip that was still surprisingly strong. Pleasure. I knew your employer was a fool the moment I heard the story. Any man who can't see value when it's standing right in front of him isn't worth the air he breathes. He turned his attention to Caleb. I'm guessing you just came from Chen's office, and I'm guessing you didn't like what you found. Crow's trying to steal the water. Crow's trying to steal everything. Mercer set down his whittling. He's been buying up land for months, always offering just enough to make people feel like they'd be stupid to refuse. Most folks don't realize they're selling their future along with their property until it's too late. Can he actually claim the water rights? Mara asked. In court? Maybe. Depends on the judge, the lawyers, how much money gets spread around. Mercer looked at Caleb. But there's another way to fight this. Crow's power comes from people believing he's inevitable. If enough folks stand up and say no, if enough of us refuse to sell, refuse to back down, then his whole plan falls apart. Who's going to stand up? Caleb asked bitterly. Everyone's struggling. Everyone needs the money. Maybe, but everyone also needs water. Mercer picked up his whittling again. You finish that, damn Caleb. You show people it can be done. Show them there's another path besides selling out to rich men from back east. I'll start talking to folks. See who's willing to fight. Caleb wanted to believe him, wanted to think that community solidarity could beat money and lawyers and influence. But he'd seen too much, lost too much. Hope felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. I appreciate it, Mr. Mercer. Don't appreciate it. Just keep digging. They rode back to the ranch in silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The sun was setting by the time they arrived, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that were almost too beautiful for the ugliness they were facing. Mara made a simple dinner, beans, cornbread, coffee. They ate without much conversation. When they finished, Caleb started to stand, to retreat to the barn the way he always did, but Mara's voice stopped him. Tell me about them, she said softly. Who? Your wife and son. Tell me about them. Caleb sat back down slowly. No one had asked him that in 3 years. People avoided the subject like grief was catching. But Mara sat there with her gray eyes steady on his face, and he realized she wasn't asking out of politeness. She was asking because she wanted to know, because she wanted to understand who he'd been before loss carved him hollow. So he told her. He told her about Sarah, who'd grown up on a ranch in Oklahoma and could ride better than most men, who'd married him when they were both 19 and too young to know better, who'd laughed loud and swore like a cowboy and kept a garden that somehow grew vegetables in soil that shouldn't have supported anything. He told her about Daniel, who'd looked like his mother and had Caleb's stubborn streak, who'd been afraid of thunderstorms but brave about everything else, who'd wanted to be a rancher like his daddy and had followed Caleb everywhere, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and why the sky was blue. He told her about the fever that had come through in the summer of 1884, quick and brutal and merciless. How Daniel had died first, burning up despite every cold cloth, every prayer, every desperate thing they'd tried. How Sarah had held their boy's body and wept until she had nothing left. How she'd followed him 2 days later, just slipped away while Caleb was outside digging the first grave. I buried them on the hill, Caleb said, his voice rough. Under a cottonwood tree Sarah used to sit under when she needed to think. Every Sunday I go up there and tell them what happened during the week. Stupid, probably. But it's the only way I know to keep them with me. Mara reached across the table and took his hand. Her palm was rough with calluses now, the skin toughened by work, but her grip was gentle. It's not stupid, she said. It's love. And love doesn't stop just because someone dies. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the worn table. Two people who'd learned that survival sometimes looks like sitting together in the dark and refusing to let go. Outside, the night settled over the ranch. The windmill creaked. The cattle lowed softly, and somewhere in the darkness, Silas Crow sat in a comfortable room planning his next move, confident that Caleb Hart would break like everyone else eventually broke. He was wrong. The work became religion. Every morning before first light, every evening until they couldn't see the ground beneath their feet. Caleb and Mara moved through the basin like people possessed, driven by something fiercer than hope. Spite, maybe, or just the stubborn refusal to let Silas Crow win without a fight. 3 more weeks passed. The dam wall rose steadily, packed earth and stones forming a curve across the narrow gap. They'd carved a spillway into the northern edge, angled to let excess water flow away without washing out the structure. It wasn't beautiful, nothing about it was beautiful, but it was solid. It would hold. The physical work changed them both. Caleb's grief didn't disappear, but it settled into something he could carry without it crushing him. And Mara stopped looking over her shoulder quite so often, stopped flinching when shadows moved unexpected. The work gave them both something to hold on to that wasn't just surviving, it was building. They fell into rhythms that felt almost like partnership. Caleb would haul dirt while Mara packed it down, then they'd switch. She learned to read the land the way he did, knowing where the ground was stable, where it would shift. He learned to trust her judgment when she said a section needed more work, that it wasn't tight enough yet. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch with coffee and aching muscles, watching the sun set over land that refused to give up despite every reason it should. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat. Both felt right. On a Wednesday morning in early August, Mara was making breakfast when she suddenly stopped, her hand frozen halfway to the stove. "Caleb?" Something in her voice made him look up fast. She was staring out the kitchen window, her face gone pale. "What is it?" "Riders, 3 of them." Caleb moved to the window. Sure enough, 3 men on horseback were approaching from the east, moving at an easy pace. Not neighbors. He knew every horse in the valley, and these were expensive animals, well fed and groomed. The men wore range clothes, but something about them felt wrong. Too neat, too deliberate. "Stay inside," Caleb said, reaching for his rifle above the door. "Like hell." Mara grabbed the cast iron skillet. "If they're here for trouble, they'll get it from both of us." The riders pulled up in front of the house. The one in the center was big, 6 foot something, and built like he made his living with his fists. He had a hard face, scarred along one cheekbone, and eyes that assessed everything with professional detachment. The other 2 were younger, nervous, hands resting too close to the pistols at their hips. Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. "Help you, gentlemen?" The big man smiled, showing teeth. "Mr. Hart, name's Garrett Vance. I work for Mr. Crow." "That a fact?" "It is. Mr. Crow sent us to check on your progress with the dam. Make sure everything's being built to proper standards. Didn't realize I needed his permission to move dirt on my own land." Vance's smile didn't waver. "Just being neighborly. Mr. Crow's concerned about structural integrity. Wouldn't want your dam to fail and flood downstream properties, would we? The only property downstream is Crow's new acquisition, and if my dam fails, the water flows into my land first, so I reckon my concern outweighs his." "Still," Vance dismounted and his men followed. "We'd like to take a look, professional courtesy." Caleb didn't move from the porch. "You're not inspecting anything without my say-so, and I'm not saying so." Vance's expression shifted, the false friendliness sliding away like a mask. "Mr. Hart, let's be clear about something. Mr. Crow's going to own this valley. It's not a question of if, just when. You can make this easy, or you can make it hard, but the end result's the same." "Then I guess I'll make it hard." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched tight as wire. Then one of the younger men shifted, his hand dropping toward his gun. Mara stepped onto the porch beside Caleb, the skillet held like a weapon. "You pull that pistol," she said quietly, "and I'll break your hand before it clears leather. Then I'll break your face. Then I'll break anything else I can reach before your friend there shoots me, which means at least one of you is going home ruined, even if you win. So think real careful about what happens next." The young man froze. His companion looked at Vance, uncertain. Vance studied Mara with something that might have been respect. "You've got fire. I'll give you that." He looked back at Caleb. "All right, Hart, we'll leave, for now. But you should know, Mr. Crow's patience isn't infinite, and accidents happen on construction sites all the time. Structures collapse. People get hurt. Would be a shame if something like that happened here. Get off my land." Vance mounted up, still smiling. We'll be seeing you again, Mr. Hart, real soon. They rode off at the same unhurried pace they'd arrived, like men who had all the time in the world because they knew the outcome was already decided. Caleb lowered the rifle, his hands shaking slightly with adrenaline. Mara set down the skillet and leaned against the porch railing. "That was a threat," she said. "Yeah." "He's going to come back." "Yeah." "So what do we do?" Caleb looked out toward the basin, toward weeks of backbreaking work. "We finish the dam, fast as we can. Once it's done, they can't stop it without committing obvious sabotage. Right now it's just dirt and stones. Once it's holding water, it becomes real. Harder to destroy without consequences." "You think that'll stop them?" "No, but it might slow them down long enough for us to find another way." They went back to work with new urgency. The dam wall was nearly complete. Maybe 3 more days of hard labor would see it finished. 3 days to beat whatever Crow had planned. They worked through the midday heat, ignoring exhaustion, ignoring pain. Caleb's back screamed protest with every shovelful. Mara's hands bled through her gloves again. Neither of them stopped. By evening, the wall had grown another foot. The spillway was clean and properly graded. They were so close. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the house settle, his mind racing through scenarios. If Crow sent men to destroy the dam, how would they do it? Pickaxes to break apart the wall? Explosives? How could he defend against something he couldn't predict? Around midnight, he gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen. Found Mara already there, sitting at the table with a cup of cold coffee. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that man, Vance, the way he smiled when he threatened us." She looked up at Caleb. "I've seen that smile before. On Richard Ashford's face when he thought he'd cornered me. It's the smile of someone who believes they can't lose." Caleb poured himself coffee and sat down across from her. "What made you fight back? With Ashford, I mean. Most people would have just given in, taken what safety they could find." Mara was quiet for a long moment. "My mother," she said finally. "She married young, like most women did. My father was charming at first, then controlling, then cruel. She spent 20 years making herself smaller and smaller, trying to take up less space, cause less trouble. Trying to survive by disappearing." Mara's hands tightened around her cup. "When I was 16, he hit her so hard she lost hearing in one ear. She just apologized, said she should have had dinner ready on time." "Christ, Mara." "She died when I was 18. The doctor said it was her heart, but I knew better. She'd just given up, just stopped fighting." Mara met his eyes. "I swore I'd never be like that, never make myself small for any man, never apologize for taking up space in the world. So when Ashford put his hands on me, I fought. And when he tried to ruin me, I ran. And when Vernon Stake abandoned me on that platform, I refused to beg." She smiled, sharp and fierce. "I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. This woman who'd been thrown away, who had every reason to be bitter and broken, sat across from him radiating defiance. She'd survived by refusing to be defeated, and somehow that stubbornness had brought her here, to his dying ranch, to help him fight a battle that probably couldn't be won. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "Don't think I could do this alone." "You could, but you shouldn't have to." They sat in the kitchen until dawn started to gray the windows, drinking cold coffee and drawing strength from not being alone. When the sun finally rose, they went back to work. The next day passed in a blur of exhaustion. The dam wall reached its full height, 6 feet at the center, tapering to 4 at the edges. The spillway was finished. All that remained was reinforcing some weak spots and adding a layer of stones to the face to prevent erosion. 1 more day. Maybe 2. Then it would be done. That evening, as the sun dropped toward the horizon, Caleb stood at the edge of the basin and allowed himself a moment of something that felt dangerously like pride. They'd done it. Against all odds, despite everything, they'd actually built the damn dam. Mara came to stand beside him, wiping her face with a cloth. "It's gonna work," she said. "Maybe." "No, maybe about it. When the rains come, this basin will fill. Your cattle will have water. The ranch will survive." She turned to look at him. "We did this, Caleb. You and me. We built something that'll last. He wanted to believe her, wanted to let himself feel the victory. But something in his gut said it wasn't over yet, said Crow wouldn't let them win this easily. They walked back to the house as darkness fell, made dinner, ate in comfortable silence. Mara headed to her room while Caleb banked the stove and locked up. He was halfway to his own bedroom when he smelled it. Smoke. Caleb's heart stopped. He ran to the window and saw it immediately, orange light flickering in the distance, coming from the direction of the basin. Mara! He was already moving, grabbing his rifle, his boots. Fire at the dam! She appeared in her doorway, already dressed, already understanding. They ran together into the night, toward the growing glow on the horizon. As they got closer, Caleb could make out figures, men with torches, moving along the dam wall. 5, maybe 6 of them. He recognized Garrett Vance's bulk even from a distance. They weren't burning the dam. They were using the light to see while they destroyed it. Caleb watched in horror as one man raised a pickaxe and brought it down hard against the packed earth. Another jabbed at the spillway with a pry bar, trying to widen it, weaken the structure. They worked with methodical efficiency, undoing weeks of labor with brutal precision. Rage flooded through Caleb, hot and blinding. He raised his rifle. Mara's hand closed over the barrel, pushing it down. No. They're destroying everything. And if you shoot one of them, Crow wins. You'll hang or rot in prison, and he'll take the land anyway. Her eyes blazed in the firelight. There's another way. What way? Truth. She started walking toward the men, her back straight, her head high. Come on. Caleb followed, his rifle lowered but ready. As they approached, Vance noticed them and held up a hand, stopping his men. Mr. Hart, Mrs. Hart. He smiled in the torchlight. Hope you don't mind us doing a little maintenance on your dam. Found some structural problems that needed addressing. You're trespassing and destroying private property, Caleb said, fighting to keep his voice level. Leave now, or I'll have the sheriff here by morning. The sheriff's a practical man. He understands that Mr. Crow's investments are good for the whole county. You really think he's going to side with one failing rancher against the man who's bringing prosperity to the valley? I think he'll side with the law, Vance laughed. The law is whatever the judge says it is, and judges have to get elected. Elected officials need campaign funds. Mr. Crow's very generous with campaign funds. He gestured to his men. Keep working, boys. The pickaxe rose again. Stop! Mara's voice cut through the night, sharp and clear. Look at yourselves. You're not just destroying a dam. You're destroying a man's livelihood, his home, his future. For what? For wages from a man who'll discard you the moment you're not useful? One of the younger men, the same one who'd almost drawn on them earlier, hesitated. We're just doing what we're paid for, ma'am. Are you? Or are you doing what you're told without thinking about what it means? Mara walked closer, addressing all of them now. How many of you are ranchers? How many of you know what it's like to work land, to build something with your own hands? This dam isn't just dirt and stones, it's survival. It's a man refusing to give up even when everything says he should. It's also illegal construction on disputed water rights, Vance said. We're doing Mr. Hart a favor, really, saving him from a lawsuit. Is it? Mara turned to him. Or is Crow scared? Scared that if one person stands up and succeeds, others will follow. Scared that he can't buy loyalty, only compliance? Vance's expression hardened. You talk too much. Someone should. Someone should say what everyone's thinking, but too afraid to admit. Mara looked at each man in turn. Crow's consolidating land, building a reservoir system. And who do you think controls that water once it's built? Who decides who gets to drink, who gets to irrigate, who gets to survive? You think Crow's doing this for the good of the valley? He's doing it for profit, one of the men muttered. Shut up, Dylan, Vance snapped, but Dylan, young, maybe 20, lowered his pickaxe. It's true, though. My daddy lost his ranch to drought 3 years back. Sold to some investors for pennies because he was desperate. Those investors turned out to be Crow's people. Now my daddy works as a hired hand on land that used to be his. That's business, Vance said. That's theft. Dylan looked at Caleb. I'm sorry, Mr. Hart. I need the money Crow's paying, but not like this. Not destroying another man's hope. He set down his pickaxe and his torch and walked away into the darkness. The other men shifted uneasily. Another one, older, weathered, looked at the dam and shook his head. "This ain't right, Garrett. We're cowboys, not vandals." "You're employees," Vance snarled, "and you'll do what you're paid to do, or what?" The older man stepped forward. "You'll fire me? Hell, I quit. I've done things I ain't proud of for money, but I won't do this." He looked at Caleb. "My name's Tom Breslin. Your father helped my family when we had hard times back in '79. Gave us beef when we were starving, never asked for payment. I should have remembered that before I agreed to this." He dropped his tools and followed Dylan into the night. One by one, the remaining men made their choices. Some walked away, some hesitated, torn between need and conscience. But none of them went back to destroying the dam. Finally, only Vance remained, standing alone with his torch, fury radiating from him like heat. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "Crow will find other men, men who aren't weak, men who understand that sentiment doesn't pay the bills." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but tonight you failed, and Crow's going to know that his money can't buy everything, can't buy loyalty, can't buy dignity, can't buy the kind of stubborn pride that makes a person stand up and say no." Vance stared at him for a long, dangerous moment. Then he smiled, cold and promising. "You just made a powerful enemy, Hart, both of you. That's going to cost you more than you know." He threw his torch on the ground, mounted his horse, and rode away. Caleb and Mara stood in the darkness, surrounded by discarded tools and guttering torches. The dam wall was damaged, chunks torn out, the spillway partially collapsed, but it was still standing, still salvageable. "We'll have to repair it," Caleb said numbly. "Start over on some sections." "We will." Mara picked up one of the torches and held it high, surveying the damage. "But we won. They came to destroy everything, and they failed." Vance was right, though. Crow will send others. Then we'll face them, too. She looked at him, her face illuminated by torchlight, fierce and beautiful, and absolutely unbreakable. "We're not alone anymore, Caleb. Those men walked away tonight. Some of them will talk. Word will spread that Crow's empire isn't as inevitable as he wants people to believe." Caleb wanted to share her optimism, wanted to believe that tonight's small victory meant something, but he'd learned the hard way that hope was expensive, and he wasn't sure he could afford it. They walked back to the house slowly, exhaustion settling into their bones. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? They'd survived another night, won another small battle in a war that felt endless. Inside, Caleb poured whiskey, something he rarely did, and offered a glass to Mara. She took it without comment. They sat at the kitchen table, drinking in silence. "I need to tell you something," Mara said finally. Caleb looked at her, waiting. "When I left Philadelphia, I told myself I'd never let another person have power over me. Never let myself need anyone, never let myself be vulnerable." She turned the glass in her hands. "But these past weeks, working beside you, building this dam, fighting these battles, I realized I was wrong. It's not weakness to need people. It's not surrender to let someone matter to you." "Mara, I'm not finished." She met his eyes. "You asked me once why I agreed to work for you. The truth is, I saw something in you that reminded me of myself. Someone who'd been broken but refused to stay broken. Someone still fighting even though the fight seemed hopeless." She paused. "I stayed because I wanted to see if two broken people could build something whole together. And I think we have. I think we're building more than just a dam." Caleb felt his throat tighten. "I don't know if I can be what you need. I'm still half dead inside, Mara. Still carrying ghosts." "I know. I'm not asking you to let them go. I'm just asking you to make room for something else alongside them." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm not Sarah. I'll never be Sarah. But I'm here. And I'm real. And I want to stay. Not as your employee, as your partner. In this fight, in this life, in whatever comes next." Caleb looked at their joined hands, hers rough with new calluses, his scarred and weathered. Two people who'd learned that survival sometimes meant holding on to someone else and refusing to let go. "I want that too," he said quietly, "more than I thought I could want anything again." Mara smiled, and it transformed her whole face, made her look younger, lighter, like some burden had finally lifted. They sat like that until the whiskey was gone and the night grew deep and quiet around them. Outside, the damaged dam waited for morning, for repair, for the work to continue. And somewhere in town, Silas Crow was getting reports of failure, of defection, of cracks in his carefully constructed empire. The war wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But Caleb and Mara weren't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The next morning arrived with cruel clarity. They walked to the basin to assess the damage in full daylight and found it worse than they'd hoped. 3 sections of the wall had been torn apart. The spillway was nearly destroyed. A week's worth of work, maybe more, just to get back to where they'd been. Caleb stood looking at the destruction, his hands curled into fists. All that work, all that pain, undone in a single night by men with pickaxes and no conscience. "We can fix it," Mara said. "I know. It'll take time, but I said I know." Caleb's voice came out harsher than he intended. He saw Mara flinch and immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry. I'm tired, Mara. Tired of fighting, tired of losing, tired of watching everything I try to build get torn down by people with more money and fewer morals." Mara was quiet for a moment. Then, "My mother used to say that the only time you truly lose is when you stop trying. Everything else is just setback. Your mother died defeated." "Yes, but I didn't." Mara picked up a shovel. "Come on, let's get to work." They spent the day repairing damage, their movements mechanical, exhausted. By sunset, they'd restored 1 section. 2 more to go, plus rebuilding the spillway. That night, Caleb rode into town. He needed supplies, nails, some lumber for reinforcing the spillway. But more than that, he needed to gauge the temperature. Needed to know if Vance's men had talked, if word had spread about Crow's failed sabotage. The general store was nearly empty when he walked in. Henderson, the proprietor, looked up from his ledger and his expression shifted, not quite sympathy, but something close. "Caleb, heard you had some trouble out at your place." "News travels fast." "Always does." Henderson came around the counter. "Dylan Reese was in here this morning, told me what happened, said Crow's men tried to wreck your dam and some of them walked away instead. That true?" "More or less." Henderson nodded slowly. "Took guts. Both for you to stand up to Vance and for those boys to walk away from paying work, times being what they are." "I didn't ask them to walk away." "No, but you gave them a reason to. That counts for something." Henderson pulled out a piece of paper. "Tom Breslin came by too, asked me to give you this." Caleb unfolded the note. It was short, written in rough handwriting. "Meeting at Mercer's place tomorrow night. Folks want to talk. Come if you can. Tom." "You know what this is about?" Caleb asked. "I know Tom's been talking to people. Know Eli Mercer's been doing the same. Know that more than a few folks are starting to wonder if selling to Crow is really the blessing he makes it out to be." Henderson leaned against the counter. "Your fight's becoming everyone's fight, Caleb, whether you meant it to or not." Caleb felt something cold in his stomach. "I didn't want that. Didn't want to drag other people into this." "Too late now. You stood up. That makes you either a hero or a target, depending on who's looking. Probably both." Caleb bought his supplies and rode home slowly, the note folded in his pocket. When he told Mara about it, she looked at him with those steady gray eyes and said exactly what he knew she'd say. "We have to go. It could make things worse. Could put targets on more people's backs. Or it could give them a chance to fight back together instead of being picked off one by one." Mara set down the plate she'd been washing. Crow's power comes from isolation, from making everyone think they're alone in this. If people start talking, start organizing, that's when his empire gets shaky. And if it goes wrong, if Crow retaliates, then we deal with that when it comes. But we can't not try just because we're scared. The next evening, they rode to Eli Mercer's place, a small farmstead on the eastern edge of the valley. When they arrived, Caleb was stunned to see nearly 20 people gathered in the yard. Ranchers, farmers, shopkeepers, people he'd known his whole life but hadn't really talked to in years. Everyone looked nervous, uncertain, like they weren't quite sure why they'd come. Mercer stood on his porch, leaning on his cane. When he saw Caleb and Mara, he nodded. "Glad you could make it. Come on up." Caleb dismounted, helped Mara down, and walked through the crowd. People nodded to him, some shook his hand. Tom Breslin was there, and Dylan Reese, and a dozen others whose names Caleb knew, but whose stories he'd forgotten. Mercer raised his hand for quiet. "We all know why we're here. Silas Crow's been buying up land, making promises, talking about prosperity and progress. Some folks have sold to him. That's their choice. But lately, his methods have gotten uglier. Pressuring people who don't want to sell, making threats, sending men to destroy property when negotiation fails." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Caleb Hart here built a dam on his own land with his own hands to save his ranch. Crow sent men to destroy it, but something unexpected happened. Those men refused. Some of them are here tonight. They chose conscience over coin, and that took courage. More murmurs. Dylan Reese ducked his head, embarrassed but proud. "The question before us," Mercer continued, "is simple. Do we let one man consolidate power over water, over land, over our futures? Or do we stand together and say enough?" A woman Caleb recognized, Mary Dockery, whose husband had sold their ranch to Crow 6 months ago, stood up. "What's standing together going to do against lawyers and money? My Bill tried to hold out. Crow buried him in legal fees until we had no choice but to sell. Standing up just means getting crushed harder." "Maybe," Mercer acknowledged. "Or maybe it means Crow has to work harder, spend more, show his true face to more people. Eventually, even money runs out when you're fighting the whole valley." "What's Hart's plan?" someone called out. "What's he building that dam for if Crow owns the water rights?" Caleb took a breath and stepped forward. He wasn't good at speeches, never had been, but these people deserved honesty. "I don't know if I can win," he said. "Truth is, Crow probably does have legal claim to the water rights. But I figure if I can prove that small operations can survive, can thrive even, then maybe other people will try. Maybe we build enough small dams, small reservoirs, spread across enough properties that Crow can't control it all. Maybe we make it too expensive, too complicated for him to consolidate everything. Or maybe we all go broke trying," Mary Dockery said bitterly. "Maybe," Caleb agreed, "but I've already lost everything that mattered, my wife, my son, my future. All I've got left is land and stubbornness. I'm fighting because I've got nothing left to lose. But you folks, you've still got families, still got chances at something better. I understand if you don't want to risk that." Silence fell over the yard. People looked at each other, uncertain. Then Mara stepped forward. "I'm not from here," she said. "I came to this valley as someone else's discarded property. Vernon Stake took one look at me and decided I wasn't worth his time. I could have given up, could have gotten back on that train and disappeared. But Caleb offered me something I hadn't had in years, choice. The chance to work for honest wages, to build something with my own hands, to matter." She looked around at the assembled crowd. "That dam isn't just Caleb's, it's mine too. I've bled for it, suffered for it, fought for it, and I'll keep fighting because I believe that people should have the right to build their own futures instead of having them bought and sold by men who see them as nothing more than assets to acquire." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Tom Breslin stood up. "I'm in. Whatever needs doing, count me in." Dylan Reese stood next. "Me too." Then another man, and another. Not everyone. Some people stayed seated, stayed silent, still too afraid or too practical to commit. But enough stood up that Caleb felt something shift, felt hope, dangerous and wild, flickering to life in his chest. Mercer smiled. "Then here's what we do. Caleb finishes his dam. The rest of us help however we can. Labor, supplies, standing watch. We document everything Crow does, every threat, every pressure tactic, every illegal act. We build a case. And when the time comes, we take it to a judge who isn't in Crow's pocket." "Is there such a judge?" someone asked skeptically. "There will be, eventually. We just have to outlast Crow's money." Mercer looked at Caleb. "Can you finish the dam?" "With help?" "Yes." "Then let's get to work." The meeting broke up slowly, people talking in clusters, making plans. Caleb found himself surrounded by neighbors offering tools, time, support. It was overwhelming. He'd been alone for so long that having people rally around him felt almost unreal. Mara stood beside him, her hand finding his in the crowd. She squeezed once, and he squeezed back. They rode home under a sky full of stars, and for the first time in 3 years, Caleb let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't fighting alone anymore. The morning after the meeting, Caleb woke to the sound of wagon wheels crunching on the dry ground outside his house. He dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch to find Tom Breslin and 3 other men unloading tools from the back of a buckboard. "Morning, Caleb," Tom called out. "Figured we'd get an early start on those repairs." Caleb stared at them, momentarily speechless. He'd expected support in theory, maybe some supplies sent his way. He hadn't expected people to actually show up ready to work. Mara appeared beside him, already dressed, her hair pinned up for labor. She smiled at the sight of the men. "I'll make coffee," she said. "Going to need it." By the time the sun had fully risen, there were 7 men working at the basin. They moved with purpose, rebuilding the sections Vance's crew had destroyed, reinforcing weak spots, hauling stones for the spillway. What would have taken Caleb and Mara a week took 2 days with help. The dam wall stood complete again, solid and strong, ready for water that might never come. But on the 3rd day, everything changed. Caleb rode into town for more supplies and found the main street strangely quiet. People who normally would have greeted him looked away as he passed. Henderson's general store had a new sign in the window. Cash only, no credit. Inside, Henderson wouldn't meet his eyes. "What's going on?" Caleb asked. Henderson busied himself with arranging cans on a shelf. "Can't extend you credit anymore, Caleb. Store policy." "Since when?" "Since yesterday." Henderson finally looked at him, and there was apology in his eyes. Crow came by, said any merchant who does business with you or anyone helping you will find themselves unable to get supplies from the regional distributors. He controls most of the shipping contracts in 3 counties. Caleb felt cold settling into his bones. "So he's going to starve us out." "I'm sorry. I've got a family to feed. A business to run." "I understand." And he did. Henderson was just trying to survive. They all were. Caleb walked out and found similar stories up and down the street. The feed supplier wouldn't sell to him. The blacksmith couldn't repair his tools. Even the saloon keeper, who'd never turned away anyone with coin, asked him politely but firmly to leave. Crow had moved fast and decisively, cutting Caleb off from every resource in town. It was brilliant in its cruelty. No violence, no obvious intimidation, just the quiet economic pressure that would eventually squeeze the life out of him. When Caleb rode back to the ranch, he found Mara waiting on the porch. She took one look at his face and knew. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad. Crow's blacklisted me. No one in town will do business with us." Mara's jaw tightened. "Then we find another way." "There is no other way, Mara. We need supplies, feed for the animals, food for ourselves. I've got maybe 2 weeks of reserves, and then we figure something out." She stood up, her eyes blazing. "Crow wants us to give up. That's the whole point of this. He wants us to feel helpless, so we'll sell. So we won't. Being stubborn doesn't put food on the table. No, but being smart does. We've got allies now, people who stood up at that meeting. Maybe they can't help publicly, but there are other ways." She was right, Caleb realized. Crow had shown his hand, revealed his tactics. Now they just had to find a way around them. That night, Tom Breslin showed up after dark with a wagon full of supplies: feed, flour, beans, coffee. He pulled up to the barn quietly, unloaded quickly, and was gone before anyone could see. "From folks who couldn't be seen helping," was all he said. The next night, it was Mary Dockery who came, bringing preserved vegetables from her cellar. "Bill sold our ranch, but he's still got friends. They wanted you to have these." Dylan Reese brought ammunition and lamp oil. An older woman Caleb barely knew brought fabric and thread, pressed them into Mara's hands with tears in her eyes. "My husband sold to Crow last year. We've regretted it every day since. This is all I can give." The supplies came in darkness, delivered by people who couldn't afford to be seen helping, but couldn't afford not to. It was a silent rebellion, a network of resistance that Crow couldn't see but could feel the effects of. But Crow wasn't finished. On a Thursday morning, a lawyer arrived from the county seat. His name was Arthur Pemberton, and he carried a leather satchel full of papers. He sat in Caleb's kitchen like he owned it and laid out the documents with professional precision. "Mr. Hart, My client Silas Crow is filing suit against you for illegal construction of water retention structures without proper permits. Additionally, you're being charged with interference with regional water management plans currently under county review. Pemberton's voice was smooth, practiced. The court date is set for 3 weeks from now. You'll need to appear with legal representation. I can't afford a lawyer, Caleb said flatly. Then I suggest you settle. Mr. Crow is still willing to purchase your property for a fair price, $10,000. That's $2,000 less than he offered before. Pemberton smiled. Market conditions change. This is his final offer. Tell him no. Mr. Hart, if you lose in court, and you will lose, you'll be ordered to dismantle the dam and pay damages. You could lose everything, including the ranch itself. Then I'll lose it fighting. Pemberton stood gathering his papers. Your stubbornness is admirable but foolish. You're not just fighting Mr. Crow. You're fighting the future of this valley. Progress always wins in the end. After he left, Mara sat across from Caleb at the table. What are we going to do? I don't know. Even if I could afford a lawyer, Crow probably has the judge in his pocket. The whole system's rigged. Then we don't fight in the system. We fight outside it. How? Mara leaned forward. Crow's power comes from people believing he's legitimate, respectable, a businessman bringing prosperity. What if we show everyone what he really is? What if we make his tactics public? People already know, they just don't care enough to risk their own necks. Then we make them care. Mara stood up and started pacing. Eli Mercer used to be a judge. He knows how the law works, knows how to build a case. What if we document everything Crow's done? The intimidation, the blacklisting, the sabotage. Present it not in a courtroom, but in public. Let the whole town see who they're really dealing with. Caleb felt a spark of hope. A public meeting. More than that. A reckoning. We invite everyone. People who sold to Crow, people still holding out, everyone in between. We lay out the facts and let them decide if this is the future they want. It was risky. If it backfired, they'd be more isolated than ever. But doing nothing meant slow strangulation by legal fees and economic pressure. All right, Caleb said. Let's do it. They spent the next week preparing. Eli Mercer helped them compile evidence, written accounts from people Crow had pressured, bills of sale showing how little he'd paid for land, documentation of the blacklisting campaign. Dylan Reese and Tom Breslin spread word about the meeting, careful to frame it as a community discussion rather than anything confrontational. The meeting was set for Saturday evening in the town square, neutral ground where everyone could come. But on Friday afternoon, everything nearly fell apart. Caleb was working at the dam when he heard a rider approaching. He looked up and felt his stomach drop. Garrett Vance sat on his horse at the edge of the basin, alone this time, his expression hard. Hart, Vance called out. Need to talk to you. Caleb climbed out of the trench, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle he kept nearby. Talk! Vance dismounted and walked closer. Up close, Caleb could see he looked tired, older than he had a few weeks ago. I'm going to say this once, so listen. Tomorrow's meeting? Don't hold it. That a threat? It's a warning. Crow knows what you're planning. He's got people ready to disrupt it, discredit you, turn the whole thing into a circus that makes you look like a fool and a troublemaker. So he sent you to scare me off? He sent me to give you one last chance to walk away with something. Vance pulled out a paper. $5,000, cash. Sign over the ranch, walk away tonight, and this all ends. Caleb looked at the paper and felt nothing but contempt. You really think I'd take that? I think you should, because if you don't, Crow's going to destroy you. Not just financially, personally. He's got men digging into your past, into Miss Ellison's past. He'll find things, use them, make both of you wish you'd never heard the name Silas Crow. Let him try. Vance studied him for a long moment. You know what your problem is, Hart? You think being right matters. It doesn't. Power matters. Money matters. Everything else is just noise. Then why are you here warning me? The question seemed to catch Vance off guard. He was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. Because some of the boys who walked away that night, they were friends of mine, good men who I convinced to do bad work. Seeing them choose conscience over coin made me think about what I've become, what I'm doing. He folded the paper and put it away. I'm still going to do my job tomorrow, still going to help Crow however he needs. But I wanted you to know what's coming. Wanted to give you a chance to avoid it. Why? Because your wife was Sarah Brennan before she married you, right? Sarah helped my sister when she was sick years ago, brought food, sat with her, never asked for anything in return. My sister still talks about it. Vance turned back to his horse. I owe your wife's memory better than what I've been giving, but I also owe Crow my loyalty. So I'm stuck between two debts, and I don't know which one weighs more. He mounted up and rode away, leaving Caleb standing alone with more questions than answers. That night, Caleb told Mara about the encounter. She listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. Do you trust him? She asked. I don't know. Part of me thinks it was genuine, part thinks it's just another tactic to throw us off balance. Either way, we're committed now. We hold the meeting tomorrow and deal with whatever Crow throws at us. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. I need to say something. In case tomorrow goes bad, in case this all falls apart, I need you to know that these past weeks, building the dam, fighting this fight with you beside me, it's been the first time since Sarah and Daniel died that I felt alive. Felt like I had a reason to get up in the morning. Whatever happens tomorrow, that's worth something. Mara's eyes glistened. It's worth everything. They sat together in the quiet kitchen until late into the night, drawing strength from each other, preparing for whatever dawn would bring. Saturday arrived clear and hot. By late afternoon, people started gathering in the town square. Caleb and Mara arrived early with Eli Mercer, setting up a makeshift platform from wagon boards. Tom Breslin and Dylan Reese moved through the crowd, handing out copies of the documentation they'd compiled. The turnout was bigger than Caleb had expected. 50 people, maybe more. Some were allies from the meeting at Mercer's place. Others were curious townspeople. And some, Caleb noticed with growing unease, were clearly Crow's people, well-dressed men standing at the edges, watching with cold calculation. At precisely 6 o'clock, Eli Mercer stepped onto the platform and raised his hands for quiet. Thank you all for coming, he began. We're here today to discuss the future of our valley, specifically what kind of future we want and who gets to decide that future. Some of you have already sold your land to Silas Crow's consortium. That's your right. But many of you are facing pressure to sell, and you deserve to know exactly what you're being asked to give up and who you're giving it to. This is a waste of time, someone called out from the back. Caleb recognized the voice. One of Crow's lawyers. Mr. Crow is offering fair market value for properties he's interested in. Nobody's being forced to do anything. Is that so? Mercer gestured to Tom Breslin. Tom, would you share your experience? Tom stepped forward, nervous but determined. 2 months ago, I fell behind on my mortgage. The bank threatened foreclosure. That same week, Crow's people approached me offering to buy my land for $600. I tried to negotiate, asked for more time, but the bank said no. Later, I found out Crow had bought my mortgage from the original lender. He owned my debt and used it to force me to sell for half what the land was worth. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. That's business, the lawyer called back. Mr. Breslin agreed to the sale. Under duress, Mercer said calmly, which is precisely the point. Mr. Crow doesn't make fair offers. He manufactures situations where people have no choice but to accept whatever terms he dictates. These are lies, another voice called out. Caleb turned and felt his stomach sink. Silas Crow himself stood at the edge of the crowd, impeccably dressed, radiating confidence. Slanderous lies told by a failed rancher trying to justify his own poor decisions. Crow walked forward through the crowd, which parted for him like water. He climbed onto the platform uninvited, his presence commanding instant attention. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand that change is frightening. I understand that some people prefer the old ways, even when the old ways mean poverty and failure. He looked directly at Caleb. Mr. Hart here is building an illegal dam on disputed water rights. When I offered to purchase his failing ranch for a generous sum, he refused out of pride. Now he's trying to turn his personal vendetta into a community issue. It is a community issue, Mara said, stepping forward, because what happens to Caleb today happens to someone else tomorrow. You're consolidating control of land and water. Once you own enough, you'll control who prospers and who fails. That's not business. That's tyranny. Crow smiled at her, cold and patronizing. Miss Ellison, isn't it? The mail-order bride who was rejected for being, how shall I put it delicately, not what was advertised. I wonder what other things you've misrepresented about yourself. The crowd went silent. Mara's face went white. Caleb moved without thinking, putting himself between Crow and Mara. You want to attack someone? Attack me. Leave her out of this. But she's not out of this, is she? She's living in your house, working your land, sleeping under your roof. Crow's smile widened. One has to wonder what exactly the nature of your arrangement is, whether it's all as proper as you claim. Rage flooded through Caleb, hot and blinding. He took a step forward, his fist already clenching. Don't. Mara's voice cut through the red haze. She put a hand on his arm, her grip firm. Then she turned to face Crow directly. You want to know who I am? I'll tell you. My name is Mara Ellison. I worked as a seamstress in Philadelphia until my employer decided I was his property to do with as he pleased. When I refused, he destroyed my reputation and made it impossible for me to work. The mail-order advertisement was my only escape. Vernon Stake took one look at me and decided I wasn't worth his time, so he abandoned me. Caleb Hart found me on that platform and offered me honest work for honest wages. Nothing more, nothing less. And yes, I've fallen in love with him. Yes, I hope to marry him, but that's between us and has nothing to do with you or your schemes. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Mara continued, her voice steady and clear. You want to paint me as something shameful? Fine. But everyone here knows what shame really looks like. It looks like a rich man using his money to destroy people who won't submit to him. It looks like threatening livelihoods, manufacturing debt, sabotaging property. You're not bringing prosperity to this valley, Mr. Crow. You're bringing fear. And I'd rather be a rejected bride with nothing than someone who profits from other people's suffering. For the first time since Caleb had met him, Silas Crow looked genuinely rattled. His smile slipped. His eyes went cold. Beautiful speech, he said softly. But speeches don't change facts. Mr. Hart built his dam illegally. The court will rule against him, and when it does, I'll own his land anyway, along with the land of anyone foolish enough to stand with him. Will you? Eli Mercer stepped forward, pulling a document from his jacket. This morning, I filed a petition with the territorial governor's office requesting an investigation into water rights claims in this county, specifically how those rights were acquired and whether proper procedures were followed. I also sent copies of our evidence to 3 newspapers in Austin, detailing your business practices. By next week, everyone in Texas will know how Silas Crow builds his empire. Crow's face went dark red. You have no authority. I have no authority as a judge anymore, true, but I still have friends in high places. Friends who take corruption seriously, friends who are very interested in examining how you've managed to acquire so many water rights so quickly, especially when those acquisitions seem to violate existing territorial statutes. Those rights were purchased legally. From county officials you've been bribing for years. We have documentation, Mr. Crow. Names, dates, amounts. You wanted to fight dirty? We can fight dirty too. The crowd erupted. People talking over each other, voices rising in confusion and anger. Some directed at Crow, some at Mercer, all of it chaotic. Garrett Vance appeared at Crow's side, speaking urgently in his ear. Crow listened, his jaw working, his fists clenched. Then he turned and pointed at Caleb. This isn't over, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. You think you've won something here? You've won nothing. I will bury you in legal fees. I will make sure every person who stands with you regrets it. I will own this valley, and there's nothing you or anyone else can do to stop me. He strode off the platform and through the crowd, Vance and his other men following. People moved aside, some reluctantly, some eagerly. The energy in the square shifted, uncertain, volatile. Mercer raised his hands again. I know this is a lot to process. I know many of you are scared, and rightfully so. Crow is powerful. He has resources we don't. But he's not invincible. And he's certainly not inevitable. He looked around at the assembled crowd. The question before each of you is simple. What kind of valley do you want to live in? One where wealth determines worth? Where one man's greed controls everyone's future? Or one where neighbors help neighbors? Where community matters more than profit? Mary Dockery stood up, her voice shaking. My husband and I sold to Crow because we were desperate. He paid us $3,000 for land worth 10. We signed the papers because we had no choice, or so we thought. But I've been thinking about what Tom said, about how Crow manufactures desperation, makes people feel like they have no options, so they'll accept whatever he offers. She looked at Caleb. I'm sorry we gave up so easy. Sorry we didn't fight. Don't be sorry, Caleb said quietly. You did what you had to do. No shame in that. Maybe. But I'm done being scared. Mary looked around at the crowd. Anyone else tired of being scared? Slowly, people started standing. Not everyone. Some stayed seated, still too afraid or too practical or too invested in Crow's promises. But enough stood that Caleb felt that dangerous hope flicker again in his chest. Dylan Reese spoke up. What do we do now? We can't just talk. We need action. You're right, Mercer agreed. Here's what I propose. Those of you who haven't sold yet, don't. Hold your land. Crow can't consolidate control if enough people refuse to sell. Those who have already sold but were coerced, we explore legal options for voiding those sales. And everyone, start documenting everything, every interaction with Crow's people, every threat, every suspicious offer. We build an airtight case against him. And in the meantime, someone asked. In the meantime, we help each other, share resources, share labor, operate as a community instead of isolated individuals. That's what beats men like Crow. Not matching his money, but refusing to play his game. The meeting continued for another hour, people asking questions, making plans, slowly transforming fear into something resembling purpose. By the time it broke up, Caleb felt exhausted but strangely energized. They hadn't won, not by a long shot, but they'd fought back, and that mattered. As the crowd dispersed, a young woman Caleb didn't recognize approached him. She had ink stains on her fingers and a notebook in her hand. Mr. Hart? I'm Rebecca Moore. I write for the Coldwater Gazette. Small paper, only prints once a week, but people read it. Would you be willing to give me an interview? Tell your story properly? Caleb looked at Mara, who nodded encouragingly. All right, he said, but you print the truth, all of it. That's all I ever print, Rebecca said with a slight smile. Even when the truth isn't popular. They talked for half an hour, Caleb laying out everything, the drought, the dam, Crow's offers and threats, the sabotage, the blacklisting. Rebecca wrote it all down, her pen flying across the page. When she finished, she looked at him seriously. This story's going to make waves. Crow's not going to like it. Good, Rebecca laughed. I like you, Mr. Hart. You've got spine. We'll run this in Tuesday's edition. Front page. She left, and Caleb and Mara finally climbed onto their horse for the ride home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The land looked almost beautiful in that light, almost forgiving. You were incredible today, Caleb said as they rode. What you said to Crow, how you stood up for yourself. For us, Mara corrected. I stood up for us. For us, Caleb agreed quietly. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Mara said, I meant what I said earlier, about falling in love with you, about wanting to marry you. I know the timing's terrible. I know we're in the middle of fighting for survival, but I needed you to know. Caleb reined in the horse and turned to look at her. In the dying light, she looked fierce and beautiful and absolutely certain. I love you too, he said. Been trying not to. Been telling myself it was too soon, that I hadn't earned the right to move on. But the truth is, you've brought me back to life, Mara. Made me remember what it feels like to fight for something besides just not dying. Mara leaned forward and kissed him, gentle and sure. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. When this is over, Caleb said, when we've beaten Crow, or at least fought him to a standstill, I want to marry you properly. Want to stand up in front of the whole town and make it official. When this is over, Mara agreed. But Caleb? Yeah? It's never going to be completely over. There'll always be another fight, another challenge. That's just life. So maybe we don't wait for perfect circumstances. Maybe we just decide to be happy anyway. Caleb thought about that as they rode the rest of the way home. Thought about Sarah and Daniel, about the years of grief he'd carried. They would always be part of him, but maybe that didn't mean he had to stay frozen in that moment of loss. Maybe moving forward wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was just choosing to live again. When they reached the ranch, Caleb helped Mara down from the horse and held her close for a long moment, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. "Tomorrow," he said, "we get back to work. Finish reinforcing the dam, prepare for whatever legal battle Crow throws at us. But tonight, let's just be. Just us. Just this moment. No fighting required." "I'd like that," Mara said softly. They went inside together, and for the first time in 3 years, Caleb's house felt like a home again. The article hit the streets on Tuesday morning like a lightning strike. Rebecca Moore had kept her word, printing every detail Caleb had given her, and then some. She'd interviewed others too: Tom Breslin, Mary Dockery, even Dylan Reese. The front page headline read, "Empire of Coercion: How One Man's Greed Threatens an Entire Valley." Below it, a detailed account of Crow's tactics, complete with names, dates, and dollar amounts. By noon, everyone in Coldwater Junction had read it. By evening, riders were carrying copies to neighboring towns. By week's end, the story had spread across 3 counties. Caleb heard about Crow's reaction secondhand. According to Henderson at the general store, who'd heard it from his cousin who worked at the telegraph office, Crow had stormed into the newspaper office demanding a retraction. Rebecca had calmly pointed to the stack of documentation on her desk and told him to sue her if he thought anything she'd printed was false. Crow had left without another word, but his face had been the color of a ripe tomato. The legal battle accelerated. Crow filed motions, countersuits, injunctions, a blizzard of paperwork designed to bury Caleb in fees and complications. But Eli Mercer proved himself worth every year of his judicial experience. He connected Caleb with a lawyer in Austin named Samuel Ortiz, who specialized in water rights and had a reputation for taking on powerful interests. Ortiz agreed to work for a reduced fee, intrigued by the case and disgusted by what he read in the documentation. "Crows made enemies," Ortiz told Caleb during their first meeting. "Powerful men don't like it when someone exposes how the game is really played. We might have more support than you think." But support didn't change the immediate reality. Caleb still had a ranch to run, cattle to feed, and a dam that needed finishing before the legal system ground him to dust. The weather wasn't helping. The drought continued merciless. The sky a brutal, cloudless blue day after day. Every morning, Caleb looked at the horizon hoping for storm clouds. Every morning brought only more heat. Then, on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the town meeting, something extraordinary happened. Caleb woke to the sound of wagon wheels. Not one wagon, but many. He stumbled to the window and couldn't believe what he saw. A line of wagons stretching down the road toward his ranch, at least a dozen of them, loaded with people and supplies. He dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Tom Breslin at the head of the procession, grinning like a fool. "Morning, Caleb. Hope you don't mind some company." "What is this?" "This," Tom said, gesturing to the crowd behind him, "is your community showing up. We figured you shouldn't have to finish that dam alone. So we brought labor, tools, food, materials, everything needed to not just finish it, but make it strong enough to laugh at anything Crow throws at it." Caleb stood speechless as people climbed down from wagons. He recognized faces from the town meeting: Mary Dockery and her husband Bill, Dylan Reese and his father, the woman who'd brought Mara fabric. But there were others too, people he barely knew, some he'd never met. Families with children, old men who moved slow but carried determination in their eyes. Young couples looking for purpose. Mara appeared beside him, her hand finding his. "Looks like we've got help," she said softly. "Looks like it." Eli Mercer climbed down from one of the wagons, moving carefully with his cane. "Well, don't just stand there, Hart. We've got work to do." The transformation was immediate and remarkable. What had been a 2-person struggle became a coordinated effort of dozens. Men hauled stones from the creek bed to reinforce the dam face. Women organized supply lines and cooked meals in massive pots over open fires. Children ran messages back and forth, their laughter strange and wonderful in a place that had known only grim silence for so long. By midday, the dam wall had been reinforced along its entire length. By evening, they'd built up the spillway with carefully fitted stones and added drainage channels to prevent erosion. What would have taken Caleb and Mara weeks took a single day with help. As the sun began to set, painting the basin in shades of gold and amber, the work slowed. People gathered in clusters, sharing food and water, admiring what they'd built together. Caleb walked along the top of the dam wall, running his hand over the packed earth and stone. It was solid. It would hold. Tom joined him, wiping his face with a bandana. Think it'll be enough? It'll hold water if water ever comes. Whether that's enough depends on Crow and the courts. Speaking of which, Tom lowered his voice. Bill Dockery did some asking around. Turns out 3 of the county officials who sold water rights to Crow, they're being investigated now for corruption. Mercer's petition to the governor actually started something. The territorial attorney's office is looking into it. Caleb felt a flicker of hope. That could change everything. Could, if they find what we think they'll find. Tom looked out over the empty basin. Still need rain, though. All the legal victories in the world won't matter if the drought doesn't break. One problem at a time. That night, the impromptu work crew camped around Caleb's ranch, turning it into something resembling a festival. Fires burned, cooking food and providing warmth as the temperature dropped. Someone produced a fiddle and started playing. Children danced, adults talked and laughed, the sound foreign and beautiful. Caleb found himself sitting beside a fire with Mara tucked against his side, watching his dying ranch come back to life in ways he'd never imagined. Mary Dockery approached with 2 plates of food, handing them over with a warm smile. Figured you 2 should eat, she said. You've been working too hard to remember to feed yourselves. Thank you, Mara said, accepting the plate gratefully. Mary settled down across from them. I wanted to apologize again for selling to Crow, for not standing with you sooner. Mary. No, let me finish. Bill and I, we were so scared, so focused on just surviving that we forgot what survival's supposed to look like. It's not just keeping your heart beating, it's keeping your dignity intact, your community strong. You 2 reminded us of that. Reminded all of us. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Mary smiled and moved away to join another group, leaving them alone with their food and their thoughts. You know what's strange? Mara said quietly. A few months ago, I was sitting on a train platform with nothing. No future, no hope, no idea what came next. And now I'm here, surrounded by people who've become friends, fighting for something that matters. It doesn't feel real sometimes. It's real. Caleb pulled her closer. And you made it real. None of this would have happened without you. I'd still be alone in that house, digging that dam by myself, too stubborn to ask for help and too broken to accept it. We saved each other, Mara said simply. That's how it works when it's real. The fiddle music picked up tempo, and people started dancing more energetically. Dylan Reese appeared in front of them, slightly drunk and grinning, offering his hand to Mara. May I have this dance, Miss Ellison? Mara laughed and accepted, letting him pull her to her feet. Caleb watched her spin and laugh, watched the firelight play across her face, and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past, not pretending the pain never happened, but making room for new joy alongside the old grief. The evening stretched long and comfortable. Eventually, people began drifting toward their wagons to sleep, exhausted but satisfied. Caleb and Mara walked together toward the house, her hand in his. Caleb, she said as they reached the porch, earlier you said you wanted to wait until this was over to get married. But what if we don't wait? He stopped, turning to face her. What do you mean? I mean, all these people are here, right now. Eli Mercer's here. He's authorized to perform marriages. We have witnesses. We have community. We have this perfect moment. Why wait for tomorrow when we could claim today? Caleb's heart kicked hard against his ribs. You want to get married tonight? I want to marry you whenever you're ready. But if you're asking whether I'd rather wait for some mythical perfect time that might never come, or seize this moment while we're surrounded by people who fought beside us, I choose this moment. I choose now. Caleb looked at her face in the moonlight, at the certainty shining in her eyes, and knew his answer before he even formed the words. Let me talk to Mercer. 20 minutes later, they stood in front of the largest campfire with the entire camp gathered around them. Eli Mercer stood before them with his worn Bible, smiling in the firelight. Mara wore the same work dress she'd been wearing all day, her hair coming loose from its pins. Caleb still had dirt under his fingernails from the dam work. They looked nothing like a traditional wedding couple. They looked perfect. Dearly beloved, Mercer began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, we are gathered here in the sight of each other and under these stars to witness the joining of Caleb Hart and Mara Ellison in marriage. These 2 have walked through fire together, They've fought battles most of us can only imagine, and they've chosen each other, freely and completely, to face whatever comes next as partners. He looked at Caleb. Do you, Caleb Hart, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To stand beside her in prosperity and hardship, in joy and sorrow, for all the days of your life? Caleb's voice came out rough with emotion. I do. And do you, Mara Ellison, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To stand beside him in prosperity and hardship, in joy and sorrow, for all the days of your life? I do. Mara's voice was clear and strong. The rings? Caleb pulled out the simple silver band that had belonged to his mother, the one he'd been carrying in his pocket for weeks. Mara produced a plain gold ring she'd bought from Henderson before the blacklisting, spending nearly all the wages she'd saved. They exchanged rings, their hands shaking slightly, both of them grinning like fools. Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. Caleb pulled Mara close and kissed her while the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Someone fired a gun in the air in celebration. The fiddle struck up again, this time playing something joyful and wild. They broke apart, both laughing, and the crowd surged forward with congratulations and embraces. It was chaos and perfect and exactly right. Later, much later, when the camp had finally settled into sleep and the fires had burned down to embers, Caleb and Mara lay together in his bed, their bed now, wrapped in each other's arms. No regrets? Caleb asked quietly. Not a single one. Mara pressed closer. Though I do wish we had had time to actually plan a proper wedding. We can do that too if you want. Big ceremony, fancy dress, the whole thing. Maybe someday, but this felt more honest, more us. She was quiet for a moment. Do you think Sarah would approve? Caleb considered the question carefully. I think Sarah would be glad I'm not alone anymore. She never wanted me to be one of those men who turns grief into a shrine and lives inside it forever. She'd probably also tell me I'm punching above my weight with you and not to mess it up. Mara laughed softly. I like her. Wish I could have known her. Me too. Caleb kissed the top of her head. But I'm grateful for you. For this. For getting a second chance I didn't think I deserved. We both get second chances, Mara said. That's the whole point. They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, and for the first time in 3 years, Caleb didn't dream about graves on hillsides. He dreamed about water filling the basin, about cattle drinking deep, about a future that stretched beyond just surviving. The next morning brought renewed purpose. The work crew stayed another 2 days, reinforcing every section of the dam, building up the banks, creating overflow channels. When they finally packed up to leave, the structure stood complete and formidable, a testament to what community could achieve when it chose cooperation over competition. But the legal battle continued to grind forward. Crow filed new motions trying to force demolition of the dam before the court date. Samuel Ortiz countered each one, buying time. The territorial investigation into corrupt officials advanced slowly but steadily. And through it all, Rebecca Moore kept printing stories, keeping public pressure on Crow and his consortium. Then, in early September, everything changed. Caleb was working on fence repairs when he noticed something odd. The cattle were restless, moving together in an agitated cluster. The chickens had gone silent. Even the air felt different, heavier somehow, charged with anticipation. He looked at the horizon and saw it. Clouds. Real clouds, dark and heavy, building in the west like an approaching army. Mara! He shouted toward the house. Come look at this! She appeared in the doorway, saw his face, and immediately looked where he was pointing. Her hand flew to her mouth. Is that rain, or it will be if those clouds keep building? They stood together watching the sky transform. The clouds multiplied, spreading across the blue like ink in water. The wind picked up, carrying the scent Caleb had almost forgotten, the smell of moisture, of coming rain. By afternoon, the storm was undeniable. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Lightning flickered between clouds. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an hour. Animals sought shelter. Birds went quiet. Caleb rode out to check the dam one last time before the storm hit. The basin waited, dry and cracked, like it had been waiting for 18 months. The dam wall stood solid and ready. Everything was prepared. As he rode back, the first drops began to fall. They started light, tentative, almost apologetic. Then they grew heavier, steadier. By the time Caleb reached the barn, rain was drumming on the roof like applause. He stood in the doorway watching water stream from the eaves, watching the dust rise from the ground in little puffs as each drop struck. Mara ran out from the house, her arms spread wide, her face turned up to the sky. Rain soaked through her dress, plastered her hair to her head. She spun in circles, laughing like a child. Caleb joined her, pulling her into his arms, both of them drenched and delirious. The rain kept coming, not a brief shower, but a real storm, the kind that settled in for hours. The kind that soaked deep into the earth and gave life back to dying things. They went inside eventually, dripping and cold, but unable to stop grinning, changed into dry clothes, made hot coffee, sat at the kitchen table listening to the rain hammer against the roof. "The dam," Mara said. "We should check on it. Give it time to fill. We'll ride out tomorrow if the rain stops." But the rain didn't stop. It continued through the night, through the next day, finally tapering off on the third morning. When Caleb and Mara rowed out to the basin, they found a miracle. Water, clean, clear water filling the depression, rising against the dam wall, flowing gently through the spillway exactly as designed. Not full yet. It would take more storms for that, but holding steady at about 4 feet deep. Enough to see that the dam worked. Enough to prove that all the labor, all the fighting, all the stubborn refusal to give up had been worth it. Caleb sat on his horse staring at the water, unable to quite believe it was real. Beside him, Mara was crying openly, tears streaming down her face as she smiled. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it." Word spread quickly. By afternoon, riders were arriving to see the filled basin with their own eyes. Tom Breslin brought his whole family. Mary and Bill Dockery came. Dylan Reese and his father. Even Henderson from the general store made the trip, bringing supplies as a peace offering now that Crow's blacklist seemed less threatening. The celebration was spontaneous and joyful. People brought food and drink. Someone brought instruments. The ranch that had been silent and dying for 3 years suddenly overflowed with life and laughter. But the real victory came 2 weeks later. Samuel Ortiz rode out to the ranch with news. The territorial investigation had concluded. 3 county officials had been arrested for accepting bribes and illegally selling water rights that weren't theirs to sell. The sales were being voided. Crow's claim to the water rights in the basin was invalid. "The dam is legal," Ortiz said, grinning. "Fully legal. Built on your land, using your water. Crow has no claim to it whatsoever." Caleb felt dizzy. What about the lawsuit? Withdrawn. Crow's lawyers advised him that continuing would expose him to countersuits for harassment and attempted fraud. He's cutting his losses. Ortiz's grin widened. "You won, Caleb. You actually won." The news hit Coldwater Junction like an earthquake. Crow's empire, built on corruption and coercion, began to crumble. People who'd been pressured into selling started filing complaints. The Territorial Attorney's Office launched a broader investigation into Crow's business practices across multiple counties. Some of the land sales were voided. Others were renegotiated at fair prices. Crow himself left the valley 2 months later, slinking away without fanfare. Garrett Vance stayed behind, taking work as an honest ranch hand and slowly rebuilding a reputation that didn't involve intimidation. Some of the men who'd worked for Crow found legitimate employment. Others left, following their former boss to whatever scheme he'd move on to next. The valley began to heal. Rains continued through the fall, not heavy, but steady. The basin filled completely, creating a small lake that shimmered in the sunlight. Caleb's cattle fattened on green grass that grew in places that had been bare dirt for years. Other ranchers, inspired by his success, began planning their own small reservoirs. The spirit of cooperation that had built Caleb's dam spread, transforming isolated struggles into community efforts. Rebecca Moore won a Territorial Journalism Award for her coverage. Eli Mercer was approached about returning to the bench, though he declined, saying he preferred dispensing wisdom from his porch to dispensing it from a courtroom. Tom Breslin bought back his land from Crow's consortium at the original price, the sale voided due to the coercion that had forced it. And Caleb and Mara built a life together. They expanded the ranch, adding more cattle, fixing up the house properly, building a new barn. Mara started a small business making dresses, her seamstress skills finding eager customers among valley women who'd previously had to travel to the city for anything nice. The money was modest but steady, and more importantly, it was hers, earned through skill and effort, not given as charity or taken as payment for something she wasn't willing to sell. On a Sunday morning in December, nearly a year after Mara had arrived on that train platform, Caleb made his weekly pilgrimage to the graves on the hill. But this time, he wasn't alone. Mara walked beside him, carrying wildflowers they'd picked together. They stood before the two simple markers, Sarah Hart and Daniel Hart, and Caleb did what he'd done every Sunday for 3 years. He talked. "Sarah, Daniel, I want you to meet someone. This is Mara. We got married back in August. She's stubborn as a mule, works harder than anyone I've ever known, and she saved my life in more ways than one." He paused, his voice thick. "I hope you don't mind that I moved on. Hope you understand that loving her doesn't mean I've forgotten you. You'll always be part of me. Always." Mara placed the flowers at the base of the markers, then stepped back and took Caleb's hand. "I'll take good care of him," she said quietly to the graves. "I promise." They stood in silence for a few moments, the wind rustling through the cottonwood tree. Then Caleb felt Mara squeeze his hand, drawing his attention. "I need to tell you something," she said, and there was something in her voice, nervousness, excitement, fear, joy, all mixed together. Caleb turned to face her fully. "What is it?" Mara took a deep breath, then placed his hand on her stomach. "I'm pregnant, about 3 months along, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you." The world stopped. Caleb stared at her, at his hand on her belly, processing what she'd just said. A baby. New life growing in this place that had seen so much death. "You're sure?" he finally managed. "I'm sure." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know it's fast. I know there's still so much uncertainty, but—" Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she gasped. "It's perfect," he said into her hair. "It's absolutely perfect." They stood there on the hill, wrapped in each other, while below them the ranch spread out green and alive. The basin gleamed with water. Cattle grazed contentedly. Smoke rose from the chimney of the house that had become a home again. The drought had broken. The battle had been won. And life, stubborn and precious and impossibly resilient, was beginning again. 6 months later, on a warm evening in late June, Mara gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Mary Dockery and 2 other women from the valley who'd become Mara's friends. Caleb paced outside the bedroom door, terrified and useless, remembering another labor years ago that had ended in joy before turning to tragedy. But this time, when the baby's cry finally pierced the air, it was followed by Mara's exhausted laugh. Mary opened the door, grinning. "You can come in now, Caleb. Come meet your daughter." He entered on shaking legs and found Mara propped up in bed, sweaty and pale but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect," Mara whispered. "Look at her, Caleb. She's absolutely perfect." Caleb sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at his daughter. She had Mara's dark hair, just wisps of it, and when she opened her eyes briefly, they were the deep blue of a newborn's, still deciding what color they'd become. Her tiny fist waved in the air, grasping at nothing, determined to hold on to this new world she'd entered. "What should we name her?" Mara asked. Caleb thought about it, thought about all the people who'd helped them get to this moment, thought about the future this child would inherit, a valley healing from greed, a community learning to stand together, a world that was still hard but no longer hopeless. "Hope," he said finally. "Her name is Hope." Mara smiled through her tears. "Hope Hart. I like it." The baby, Hope, made a small sound, something between a yawn and a complaint. Mara offered her a finger, and the tiny hand wrapped around it with surprising strength. "She's a fighter," Mara said, "just like her parents." "She'll need to be," Caleb said quietly. "World's not going to get easier just because we want it to." "No, but she won't face it alone. She'll have us. She'll have this valley, this community we've built. That's more than either of us had." Caleb leaned over and kissed Mara's forehead, then gently touched Hope's soft cheek. 3 people now where there had been one. A family, improbable and precious, built from discarded pieces that had somehow fit together into something whole. Outside, the sun was setting over the ranch. The basin still held water, its surface reflecting the orange and pink sky. The cattle were settling in for the night. The land was at peace. And on the hill overlooking it all, two graves stood beneath their cottonwood tree, markers of loss that would always hurt but no longer defined everything. Sarah and Daniel were gone, but they weren't forgotten. They'd become part of the soil of this place, part of its history, part of the foundation on which new life was built. Caleb looked at his wife and daughter and felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. He'd been given something he never expected, a second chance at happiness, at family, at a future worth fighting for. The road to get here had been brutal, the battles had been real, but somehow, impossibly, he'd survived. They'd survived. Together. "Thank you," he whispered to Mara. "For what?" "For getting off that train, for staying, for fighting beside me, for loving me when I'd forgotten how to love myself, for all of it." Mara shifted hope to one arm and reached for Caleb's hand with the other. "We saved each other, remember? That's how this works." "Yeah," Caleb agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "That's exactly how it works." They sat together as darkness fell, this new family of three, listening to Hope's soft breathing and the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would always be new challenges. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The storm had passed, the drought had broken, and in the heart of the Texas Hill Country, on a small ranch that had nearly died, life was flourishing again. Outside, stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The moon rose over the basin, its reflection dancing on the water. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the night. Not a sound of menace, but just another voice in the vast chorus of creatures claiming their place in the world. Caleb Hart sat with his wife and daughter, surrounded by the land his father had built, and the future he and Mara were creating, and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 long years. Complete. Not because the pain was gone, it would never be completely gone. Not because every problem was solved, there would always be new problems. But because he'd learned that healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means making room for new joy alongside old sorrow. It means choosing to build even when you're not sure the foundation will hold. It means finding someone to stand beside in the darkness and refusing to let go until dawn comes. And dawn had come. For Caleb, for Mara, for Hope, for the valley. The story that had begun with a woman abandoned on a train platform and a man buried alive in grief had become something neither of them could have imagined. A story of community over greed, perseverance over despair, love over loss. It was a story worth telling, worth living, worth fighting for. And as Caleb sat there holding his family close, listening to the night sounds of his ranch, he knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every battle, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive at this perfect, impossible moment. The basin would hold water for years to come. The cattle would thrive. The land would heal. And the Hart family, this new, precious, hard-won family, would grow and prosper on soil fertilized by struggle and watered by tears that had finally turned to joy. This was more than survival. This was more than just not dying. This was life, full and fierce and beautiful. And it was only just beginning.